Hello, Mr. Kirioth. So today we're going to talk about when inspiration becomes plagiarism, or at the point when it's just a rip-off.
It's happening a lot. I mean, we don't have to look at things like MMOs. How many WoW clones are there? Don't even want to...
Well, that's another thing, actually, yeah. So things like WoW clones, and even things like the next Call of Duty game, I think it kind of has a... You end up in a situation where you don't have that much in the way of innovation because the stagnation is the market leader. Now, this is kind of going off at a tangent, as we've already at the very start, which is kind of bad, although really good. I don't know, Miss Kirk, I'm going to say it's good. And you end up in a situation where you've got people who are, you know, the suits or whatever, the investors, they look at something and they say, look, World of Warcraft has got 10 million subscribers. So we want a WoW clone or a game that is very similar to that, because surely then that will get 10 million subscribers.
And it's that kind of thing that has really made it rare to find any sort of change from the norm. I mean, most MMOs are very, very similar in like the basic design and the way they play, largely because WoW took the best of all the previous generation MMOs and did whatever it could with them to make it, you know, more accessible, more popular, more fun, and arguably they got the formula absolutely right, because if they hadn't, they wouldn't have 10 million subscribers, which is still more than anyone else.
You've hit a nerve there, saying it's more fun, because that's objective, but what they definitely did do was bring it to the mass market. So they took a genre of games and showed them to the world, effectively, and look what happened. And now I think when people sit down and they go, look, we want to make a game which is going to be as successful as World of Warcraft or as successful as Call of Duty has been, they end up copying, and then that is not really good because it doesn't have the history of those titles, the exposure, and it's very difficult to take them on in their own ground. You know, this is a wild example, but it's about the same thing as you look at Google and say, oh, Google. A lot of people use that search engine. I think we're going to make a search engine. It's going to be like Google, and we're going to get loads of people using it. Well, you're not, because Google is Google, and it's practically impossible to beat. It's the same with things like Call of Duty and World of Warcraft. You see Battlefield 3s, you see look at Medal of Honor Warfighter, an absolute collapse. And what is that? It's just a clone of Call of Duty.
It's that thing of looking at success and thinking that success must be done in that way. It has to be the same, otherwise it won't be as successful. But the thing is, if you keep copying the same thing over and over again, the copy is never going to be as successful as the original, because you've already got that game, you've already got Call of Duty, you've already got WoW. Why would you then ditch those games to go and play a game that is 90% the same, but not that game that you've been playing before? You know, it's like you're not gonna drop WoW to go and play something that plays nearly as well as WoW, or something that's nearly as good as, or nearly as polished as. You're just going to stick with the original product every single time.
Sometimes I think it's a case of you want, especially it's for me, like I want something mind-blowing and absolutely, you know, rammed full of so much innovation, it's just blew my mind. But that's never really going to happen. You need like an evolution of the games, and I think Guild Wars 2 has done a pretty decent job of this concerning MMOs. So it's very similar to WoW. You know, you can't really flame me for not saying that. But it does some things which are better, and it's taken WoW's formula and refined it at certain points, and it's almost like a natural progression. And then when the next MMO comes out, it'll be a progression on top of that. You know, and I think that's probably the way that is going to go. But in terms of things like Call of Duty, we've kind of gone off topic here a bit, but in terms of things like Call of Duty, you've got the consoles, which this generation of consoles has been here for so long. There is no need to innovate. There is no need to bring, you know, new visuals and things like that to games like Call of Duty, because you can just essentially release the same game just with a different, you know, a different single player story. And a few more multiplayer elements.
Yeah, well, the thing is, Call of Duty now, it's to the point where it sells no matter what you do to it. And because it sold so well the first time, and then the second time, and then the third time, and it's just going to keep going, because why would you change a winning formula? Why would you... I mean, how many copies did Black Ops 2 sell? I don't even know. But it was...
Well, didn't it make $500 million in the first 24 hours, Black Ops 2?
It was something ridiculous.
So that's quite a bit. But this extends to films as well. So if you look at the movies, you see things like Prometheus coming out because it's aliens. You know, it's like Terminator 3 when that came out. You know, why has that come out? It's because it's Terminator. They invest in sequels because they know it's an assured thing. You know, you're going to make money off this. Rambo 4. You know, why was that ever made? Because Rambo 1, 2 and 3 made so much money. You know you're going to watch it because it's a Rambo film. And you end up in situations where you don't... There's not a lot in the way of new ideas coming out. And one thing that annoys me is if you look at things like Superman, Spider-Man, you get the same film coming out. Or it gets reinvented. It's like, hang on a minute. Where's the new superhero? Everybody knows who Superman and Spider-Man is, but where's Big Winner Man or something? I don't know. You know, some other, and you can just apply that straight to games as well. But I think we've gone a bit crazy, and we've gone off what we were actually trying to talk about to some degree, which was, when does inspiration become blatant plagiarism? That is, when does a game developer look at another game and just totally copy it?
See, in a way though, it is still very related, because there are plenty of games that are directly comparable to the popular things, like WoW, like COD. There are many films that are directly comparable.
Well, let's have a competition, a little game, because you're totally right. Let's say if I name a game, can you name something which is very similar? So let's start off with WoW.
See, for WoW, I'd actually, this is not going to make people happy, but I'd go for Star Wars, The Old Republic, the latest one.
Yeah, in fact, yeah, that is the most. Yeah. You know, you could say things like Rift, but Rift has got a slight difference. You know, add the Rift, you could say Warhammer Online.
Yeah.
Add slight little differences, but not a lot. You could even say Guild Wars 2, like we did say, but Guild Wars 2, I would say, is the most different out of most similar games to World of Warcraft. Well, then if I say a game to you like, I don't know, let's say DayZ. Links, Mr. Kirioth.
Well, funnily enough, there is another game, and I believe you've covered the game yourself, sir, which is the WarZ, or the WarZ, depending on if you're American and can pronounce things
I know,
properly.
I'm becoming Americanised here. I don't know whether that's good or what. You decide.
DayZ kind of sounds better, but it's not Z, it's Z, so I'm conflicted internally. Conflicted.
I know, my brain says Z, my mouth's saying Z, and it's like, I'll say WarZ, DayZ. What? WarZ, DayZ. Ah!
But yeah, I mean, pronunciation aside, I'd say that I think the biggest sort of current example of, I want to say ripping off, but that might offend people. So I'm going to say ripping off is is WarZ and DayZ, or DayZ and WarZ. The DayZ it came out as a mod for Arma 2, and it was ridiculously popular, and still is. I mean, Arma 2 shot up to the top 10 sellers list on Steam shortly after the DayZ started to get loads of coverage. Now, if a mod is causing a game to catapult its way up to the top of the Steam bestsellers list, then obviously that mod is doing well, it's having a big impact. And then it got a bit weird when the WarZ appeared, and it was stated that the WarZ had been in development for years, and it was very, very similar to DayZ. It was an MMO-based version of DayZ, for God's sake. I don't know what to go for.
Z, let's just go for Z.
Let's just go for Z.
At least, yeah, Z.
But yeah, the WarZ came out. Well, didn't come out. The WarZ was announced as having been in development for years and years and years.
But is there any evidence of this?
Well, this is the thing that I think most people who have looked into this struggle with. It's supposed to have been in development for years, but there was strangely little to show for it until the DayZ suddenly took the world by storm. You know, it was suddenly, oh yeah, we've been making this, but we didn't want to show anyone until this vastly popular mod appeared, and we just so happened to have used quite a few of the design decisions from DayZ and implement them into the WarZ. I say the entire bloody game, basically. Thirst, hunger, illness, bandages, heat, sensitive. You know, you can freeze to death. You need to eat. You need to drink. You need to bandage yourself. You need to take drugs to stay alive. You know, just everything about it, to me, instantly smacked of, oh, so you're cashing in on this then? And it's not just little things like that. I say little things. It's not just the entire game being borderline identical apart from the engine, which is quite a big thing, you have to admit. It's little things like the developers of the WarZ have made comments about some of the odd problems that DayZ's had. Like there's the thing with hacking and server switching and ghosting. You can have people running into a city, you follow them, you try and shoot them, they log out, they log in on a different server, reposition, come back to your server, and then kill you. I've had that in DayZ before. And the WarZ was saying things like, well, it's a mod. There's not a lot of things that can be done about this. This is stuff the engine wasn't designed for. We have our own engine, which is the same engine that War Inc. uses, which is a terrible game. And it's so bad. And they were saying there are all these problems. Our game will not have that. It won't have hackers. It won't have ghosting. It won't have people switching servers. And already it does. And that's like... That to me kind of is a very big indicator of it being directly lifted from DayZ, because...
Well, it is. I mean, listen, you'd have to be a fucking idiot if you looked at WarZ, you looked at DayZ and were like, oh, look at this, WarZ looks like a brand new, fresh take on this. It's not. It's an absolute... It's a clone, but it's a more simplistic clone. From my experience with it, it's nowhere near as difficult as DayZ, which really takes away from the whole apocalyptic zombie survival thing, because you really need to be, that fear of, am I going to be able to hit this shot? Can I make it over there? If I fall out this tree, I might break my leg and all the rest of it. Whereas WarZ doesn't really have any of that, to the extent that DayZ has it, which is kind of a letdown. But I think the thing is, if you are going to make a zombie survival game, then surely the DayZ way, Z way, is the only way, really. How could you not be influenced by that? Because you couldn't make... I mean, it's like the absolute... That is... How can I explain it? That is like the pinnacle of the zombie survival game, yeah? How can it be any more detailed? How can it be any better than that? Than the basic things that are in DayZ?
See, this is the thing for me. I agree. I mean, DayZ has got... It is one of the few things recently that has been genuinely innovative. I can't think of another game that really does what it's done. I mean, there are other things to a certain extent. You could get the same kind of vibe from like Minecraft, for instance. But that whole thing of if you die, you're dead, you've lost everything. There's a real focus on you cannot be seen, you cannot be caught. You've got to sneak around. You've got to survive. You can't. It's not so much getting better. It's just surviving. And okay, granted, there's not much else you can do in a zombie survival setting unless you go the route of, say, Left 4 Dead or something like that. And there are already plenty of games that do that. But I think there are ways to do it that don't just scream rip-off. Because, for instance, the WarZ, there could have been far more attention placed on things like teamwork. It could have been made into a game where... Say you've got like a group of 4 people, like Left 4 Dead. You've still got the survival aspect, but you could have some way of making groups far more survivable. You could have some way of, I don't know, setting up base, doing things that you can't do in DayZ. Trying to expand on it at the very least, make it better.
You know what? The map is basically identical as well. It's the same type of setting. Now I know DayZ is set in the Eastern European theatre, whereas I believe WarZ is in Colorado, I think the map was. There may be more maps, I don't know, but the map I played on was basically a clone of the map. Not a clone as in exactly the same layout, but the same feel. It had a fairly decent-sized city, but a lot of it was woodland and things like that. The same as DayZ, which is like, have they just looked at that and thought, you know what, we'll rip that off?
This is exactly the problem I have with it. There's ripping off, which is what they've done, but I can kind of live, I know it's going to sound bad, but I can kind of live with someone ripping off if they try and improve, if they try and innovate, if they try and make it better. I mean, granted, I'll still sit there and say, yeah, you really didn't come up with that yourself, but you've made it. If if there are aspects that are superior to DayZ, then I'll sit back and say, well, okay, fair enough. The idea wasn't yours, but you've made it better than the original. I can, that's fine. That actually shows some form of effort. But the features for the WarZ are the same as the features for DayZ, except death is not permanent because you get your character back. And that's about it. Oh, you can't drive vehicles at the moment either. I mean,
no, death is permanent if you play it on hardcore.
But then if you're given the option to play it on hardcore or to...
Yeah, well, this is like why it's a bit more...
It's more arcadey, isn't
people
it?
To get into.
And it's not...
Yeah.
I'd say it's not just that, but I think also the attitude of the people who make it also, reflect on the game.
It's really poor, really poor.
It is terrible. I mean, there's the DayZ, the standalone, when it's released, the first sort of alpha build of it when it's released, is going to be called the Foundation release. That's been how it's been for ages. I don't know. I mean, Rocket's been referring to that for months, so it's established. That is what the DayZ alpha release would be called, the Foundation release. So why then does the WarZ decide to call their release, which is incidentally right about the same time as the DayZ's release, why have they decided to call it Foundation release? I mean, how far does that plagiarism have to extend? That even the builds that are being released are having the names copied from the mod. I mean, that says to me, not we have seen a good idea, we wish to make it better. That to me says we have seen your good idea and we want to make a quick buck off it. Because that's how the whole thing comes across. And I think that's the difference between something being inspired and being plagiarised. If the WarZ had come along and it had similar things to DayZ, but things have been improved, things have been changed, there were extra features, they'd really packed it full of stuff to differentiate it, then I'd say that it would have been more inspired than it had been plagiarised from DayZ. But it's not.
Yeah.
It's just the same game, but being charged for now, and to a slightly lesser quality. And especially when it comes to things like customer service and so on, there's no end of complaints about it, which again point to it not being an effort, but just being a copy, which is, let's face it,
I think
crap.
actually they copied the League of Legends terms and conditions.
They did, because there was a link to the LoL website in them, which again is like it just comes down to effort every time, and it's inspiration means you see it and you think I could do something as good as, if not better than that.
But is this not the beginning of... Well, I say the beginning. Zombie games have always been being hammered out because they make loads of cash. Is this not the start of one of these stagnation periods where we've already got a clone of DayZ, WarZ, which is basically the same, but it is making money? It would have made a fairly substantial amount of money.
I get the feeling it is, and to be honest, that's kind of a shame, because I know zombie games have been hammered out enough times already, but they've always been of a similar flavour. They've always been of the sort of Left 4 Dead type thing. You're given
your action survival.
Yeah, you're given your gun, you're given a scenario, or you're given a map, and you've just got to live as long as you can. There's not been a lot of detail. There's not been that sort of that really risky element of I've been alive for 2 hours. This is the longest I've been alive, which, by the way, is the longest I've ever managed in DayZ. But there's no real element of risk, whereas DayZ introduced all these things that you find in other games. It's the perfect survival game in that respect, because it's not about blasting your way clear of a town. It's not about sitting there sniping people from a distance or messing about throwing Molotovs at people. It's your character. You are trying to make your guy survive as long as you possibly can. And the fact that it's a very good idea, and I mean clearly it's a good idea because it's massively popular, but the fact that that's already been copied to such a rigorous extent, the fact that something's already been made that's pretty much identical, is kind of depressing, because that means that this basically new genre of game, this thing that's only just come to public attention, that is so different and so fresh and just a really good new thing to appear, is already becoming just I don't know, just milked for all it's worth. And the worst thing is, it's not even by the guy who made it. That's the other depressing thing. It's not even as though we can sit here and say, oh, well, the DayZ came out and it was good, but now we're on DayZ 5. Everything's just the same. It's not even like that. It's DayZ hasn't even been released as a standalone. It's still a mod. And it's already been plagiarised to the point where there's a direct clone available. And I mean, if that's happened within the last, year, so quickly after it being, becoming known. God knows what's going to happen by, this time next year. How many clones are we going to have of this one game? Are any of them going to be any different? I don't think so. They're probably always going to be exactly the same. And yet,
I would hopefully, I think that DayZ will completely conquer it. I mean, I am waiting for that to come out because I fully intend to get us a DayZ server for Unit Lost, which I'm looking forward to. And to me, it's already established itself as the main zombie survival game.
Yeah, definitely.
Realistic, like that is what I would look up to now. WarZ, I just see that as a cheap knockoff. But some people don't, and that's kind of the thing. So we're going to put this over to you guys in the comments. What do you think? Have you played WarZ? Have you played DayZ? What do you think? And also, answer the question, when do you think inspiration just becomes plagiarism? Let us know in the comments, guys. We've been Stylosa and Kirioth, and we'll catch you next time. Toodaloo.